The race to be Nevada's next governor is on, and former Senator Dean Heller thinks he has what it takes. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Thompson. I'm the editor of the Nevada Independent. For the next hour, I, along with assistant editors Riley Snyder and Michelle Rindels, will be asking Senator Heller a series of questions so that you, the voters, can get to know him better as we get closer to the primary and you make your choices. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate
Thanks for
your
having
time.
me. Yeah.
You, as you know, sir, are in a packed Republican primary.
15, yes.
That saw a fairly major event last week. President Trump endorsed your opponent, Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo.
Sure.
So my first question is, do you think you can win without the Trump endorsement?
Well, the question is whether or not Lombardo can win with it. I think that's probably a better question. In fact, the biggest event probably was the fact that within 48 hours at the state convention, they tried to coordinate him and they couldn't do that, and he lost 2-1. So I think the message in the Trump or the Lombardo camp right now is that if you're an informed voter, you're not voting for him.
So you think the Trump endorsement counts against him?
I don't think it makes a difference, is all I'm saying. Sure, all of us would have probably loved to have the Trump endorsement, but in this case, to know Joe Lombardo's not to vote for him. So whether he gets the Trump endorsement or not, clearly you could see at the state convention, didn't matter.
Did you know that was coming?
No, I think it surprised everybody.
Did you ask Trump for his endorsement directly?
I've talked to him, yeah. I talked to him several times. In fact, I was at Mar-a-Lago. My wife and I flew out there, probably been a month, 6 weeks from now. And we had good conversations, but he never let on how he was going to do this. And, if you can get into Trump's mind, please let me know how that's going to work. But if you take a look at some of the other races, like there's a race in Ohio where he took and endorsed the most liberal candidate in that race, the most liberal candidate in the race in Pennsylvania. And he's in a tough spot in Georgia right now, so I'm not certain that we'll see how it all plays out.
So Trump's been on the national stage now for some time, I guess going on 6 years politically, we'll say.
Yeah.
In 2016, and I think you recently referred to this event in 2016 where you talked about, maybe I should have walked off the stage.
Yeah.
You and Trump have had your ups and downs. I think
we've had our
that's pretty
differences.
clear.
We've never been on a double date. Let's be clear.
So should you have walked off the stage? And what's your view of Trump now?
Yeah. And I've said this publicly, and frankly, I've said it to President Trump himself, and have to apologize for having gone up on that stage with Joe Heck. Joe Heck was running for the Senate at the time, as you recall. And I truly do believe to this day, had he not unendorsed on that stage that day, that he probably would be running for re-election now. He pulled that letter out of his coat pocket. I had no idea going up on that stage that he was going to do that. But like I said, the mistake that I did make is once I heard him, listening to him, watching what he was doing, and having not informed me, I should have walked off that stage. For that, I apologize not only to Donald Trump but to the voters here in Nevada. That's probably the biggest political mistake I think I've made in my career.
Really?
Yes.
What's the runner-up?
What's the word? I don't have an answer for that.
All right, let's turn to tax policy.
All right.
So, Senator, have you signed any no tax pledges at this point in the campaign?
No. And by the way, I haven't been asked. Just so that you know, no one has approached me and said, "Hey, will you sign this no tax pledge?" And frankly, if I had, I probably would have anyway. I've never raised a tax in my career. In fact, I was the author of President Trump's Tax Cut and Jobs Act. I gave multiple tax cuts throughout my career to Americans, and so the fact that I've never raised a tax or considered raising a tax, there would be no reason for me to sign a pledge. Had it been presented to me, I probably would anyway.
You have said that you want to cut the sales tax.
Correct.
By 20 to 25%.
That's correct.
And you know that's a huge part of the general fund.
50%.
Yeah. Are you
I do know.
concerned about what that's going to do to your ability, if you're elected governor, to create a state budget with that steep of a cut?
Well, here's the bottom line: is right now we have inflation, and I don't know if those on the panel understand this, but if you have if you have a product you want to buy for $100 and the sales tax at 5%, you pay 5 cents or $5 for that sales tax on that $100 product. But if you go back the next day and it's $120 because of inflation, now you're paying $6 I'm telling you right now, government loves inflation. The reason they love inflation is because their coffers grow. And it's burgeoning at all levels in government right now because of inflation across this country. All I want to do is get this burden off the backs of hardworking Nevada taxpayers. Why should they, who are struggling today, have to pay to grow the size of government during a recessionary period and a period of inflation? I want to eliminate that inflation growth off the backs of Nevada taxpayers. That's where we're talking about the 20-25%. They're getting growth. This government is growing, and it's growing fast. And I don't think this is a period of time to be doing that.
You've also said you want to cut the state general fund by 20%.
Correct.
But you want to spare the public safety workforce.
Correct.
How do you plan to do that? I mean, are you thinking about layoffs of 20% of the state workforce? How is this going to work?
Well, we'll take a look at it right now. I mean, if you go to public safety right now, probably 40% of their positions are open, and 40% of them. I'll bet you if you go to DETR, you go to DMV, you go to Department of Transportation, and look at the amount of openings that they have right now, I think if you didn't fill them, you'd probably get to that 20%. So I don't think it would be that difficult. Nobody's ever done it. I'm talking tax cuts here. I provided tax cuts at the federal level. When was the last time Nevadans actually received relief from their tax burden here in the state of Nevada? In my lifetime, I don't think it's happened. When was the last time we had a sales tax cut? When was the last time we had a property tax cut? When was the last time we had a gas tax cut? It simply doesn't happen here in Nevada. So not only did I give the largest tax cut at the federal level, my goal is to give the largest tax cut at the state level.
You know, you're probably well aware that it's hard to get people in these highway patrol jobs. It's hard to get people in these corrections jobs because they can't compete with everything else around them.
No, we defunded the police. The state government defunded the police in the last legislative session. Not only did they not give any increases to the state police and Capitol Police and all that, they actually reduced their take-home pay. We defunded the police at the help of Sheriff Lombardo. Their group came in and lobbied against any increase in their budget and any increase in their training. Do you know that the Capitol Police and the Highway Patrol can only go to practice at a shooting range twice a year because they don't have enough bullets? And yet we can constantly go to the legislature. This has to stop. It literally has to stop. And I'm not about to put public safety at risk when I go through this process with our budget.
How do you think you're going to retain people in this very strained corrections environment, this very strained highway patrol environment, and in many other positions? As you mentioned, there's a lot of vacancies.
Right, and
How do you keep the quality?
Well, there's a reason why the Nevada Police Union has endorsed my campaign. You know, they know that they can trust me. They know they'll never have to wonder where the governor is when things get tough. They'll never have to question where the governor. They'll know that I'm with them 100% of the time. Having said that, they need to have the tools and what they need in order to be to do their job. Their biggest problem right now is their contribution to PERS. In other words, I talk to Highway Patrol all the time. I talk to their supervisors, and they'll bring someone in from Texas and say, hey, that's a great salary. They'll come over here for a couple of weeks and say, wait a minute, I didn't know we had all these deductions. And the biggest deduction, of course, is their contribution to PERS, 50% contribution to PERS. That's why they do better in Washoe County or Clark County. That's why the police, that's why they're able to pick these guys off all the time. That's why they lobby against their budgets, is because they don't want them to make more, because then they can pick them off to Metro or the police chiefs. But their biggest concern right now is their contribution level to PERS. And if you go to Washoe County or Clark County, it's either nothing, their contribution is nothing, or it's a fraction of what they have to pay at the state level. So those are the kind of changes that are going to be necessary in order to retain them. But I'm telling you, I'm going to take state troopers and I'm going to put them at a new level. It's going to be the #1 law enforcement agency in the state when I'm governor.
Is that going to mean a pay raise for them?
Well, if they get a reduction in their contribution to PERS, yes, their take home will go up.
Yeah, I had a budget question for you, Senator. So a growing part of Nevada's general fund budget every year goes to Medicaid expansion and paying that federal match that we have to ever since Governor Sandoval expanded Medicaid. So as governor, is that something you want to undo to help meet this goal of yours to cut the budget by 20 to 25?
Well, first of all, I never would have done it. Let's be clear, I never would have expanded Medicaid in the first place. I voted against Obamacare, and that was part of the Obamacare expansion. And once it was done, and it got seeded in, it was very, very difficult to turn the clock back on that. And if I could, I would. I think it's going to be very, very difficult in order for that to happen. So we'll have to take a look at it. But I never would have instituted that huge expansion. Keep in mind, as far as the state was concerned, contributions coming from the federal government came for several years. It wasn't until years later that we now have to use matching funds. That was always going to come. And in my opinion, governor knew that and knew that it wouldn't happen on his watch, making it a burden for future governments.
Mm-hmm. Senator, you stood next to Governor Sandoval at the time that we were all talking about the Affordable Care Act and expanding Medicaid in Nevada. And for a few minutes, you did seem to support it. And then there was a quick turnabout on that within about 24 hours. So it seems as if you at least gave it some thought at that time before you finally came down against it. Can you explain why you think that Medicaid expansion is not the right answer for the underserved insured community in Nevada?
As I would have said at the beginning, had I been given the option as a governor, I never would have expanded it. Once it was expanded, it was almost impossible to turn the clock back, especially with the current governor that expanded it in place. And so when we came to repealing it, which I voted to repeal, it's amazing how social media works. There's people out there that think I actually voted for Obamacare, and then there's people that think I voted against eliminating Obamacare, which I, of course, did both. But needless to say, there were several pieces of legislation out there, and I picked and chose between the legislation, but I was the author of the skinny bill. The skinny bill that almost did pass, and it was of course, McCain that walked down on the Senate floor, gave a thumbs down, and that's what killed the repeal of Obamacare itself. I voted for the skinny bill. I voted for that particular bill at the time. So, in other words, there were quite a bit of discussion about it, but most of it was around the fact that we had a Republican governor that expanded Medicaid. I think he was the only Republican governor in the country that supported the expansion.
Is it too late to undo that in your mind, or do you think you could make that a major part of your platform?
Right. If I could, I would. Let me just put it that way. If I could, I would. So I'll take a look at it. I'll sit down with the budget director, and that conversation will be had.
So you just don't know if you can.
Like I said, once you put it in place, once it gets so deep into society, it's very, very difficult. I would love to. By the way, I would love to, but I'm not quite sure that being in place as it is now, if that's doable. But if I could, I would.
Mm-hmm. We had a couple other questions about various other taxes that have been passed in the recent years. So in 2021, the state legislature passed the new tax on gold and silver proceeds from mining. So as governor, is that something you'd seek to repeal, or how would you approach that tax?
Well, I didn't like it. I think you put the mining industry over a barrel. They didn't have a choice, and so they ended up having to support it, or it would have been worse. I believe it's an unconstitutional tax, personally. And so I'll take another look at it when I'm governor, sit down hopefully with the Republican Attorney General, and determine whether or not that was actually a constitutional tax.
Mm-hmm. What about it makes you think it's...
Well, net proceeds is the only way that you can raise a tax on the mining industry. That's not a net proceeds tax, so it's unconstitutional.
The commerce tax has been a big part of your campaign, wanting to repeal that.
Yes.
Is that just on principle, or are you hearing people that are actually really struggling under that tax?
Well, it's a tax that you pay a tax at multiple levels for the same entity. No, it's a terrible tax. I mean, it's a terrible tax because, if you stop and think about it, this was a ballot question. The commerce tax was a ballot question. It lost 70-30. And then you had a Republican governor with a Republican legislature. And I'm telling you, Republican Party doesn't trust their governors. Think about it. In the 21st century, the two largest tax increase Nevada has had in the 21st century has come from Republican governors, not Democrat governors, but Republican governors. And the joke, of course, in the Democratic Party is, why raise taxes? We'll just wait for the next Republican governor. That's why I'm emphasizing that I want the largest tax cut in Nevada history when I'm governor. That's why I can continue pushing it, and the commerce tax will be part of it. And if I can't get the legislature to come with me on this, I'll put it back on the ballot.
And the margins tax that was on the 2014 ballot is different than the
Well, they just changed the name. Just changed the name.
The commerce tax.
Yeah.
Have you actually seen, though, businesses that are saying, I can't bear this tax? I mean, I'm struggling under it. Or is it more of...
Let me put it this way. I haven't talked to a businessman that's for it. All right? Go out there on the street, go out this door, start talking to business. Are you for the commerce tax? There's not a businessman out there that's come up to me and said, hey, please don't repeal the commerce tax. Keep it in the books. I love it. I truly believe our ability for economic development here in the state begins and ends with repealing that commerce tax. I believe that there are companies that won't come to Nevada because they consider that, and I consider that, a income tax, and I believe that's unconstitutional also. I think this commerce tax in itself is an income tax, and I think it ought to be tested legally as to whether or not it actually can be in place. But if you're in California and you're taking a look at Nevada and you say, wait a second, they just instituted a business income tax. Why would we go there when we can go to Texas or Florida or Idaho or Utah? I truly do believe it does have impact on the economic development of the state of Nevada.
So you have very strong opinions on the commerce tax. I think that's fair to say.
I do.
So in 2015, when Governor Sandoval and Republicans in the legislature pushed this through, is there a reason you didn't speak up more against it at that point?
I mean, my plate's full. My plate's full. I'm back in Congress, pushing the issues that I think that are important. No, I made it loud and clear. Just because it didn't end up in your paper that I didn't support the commerce tax doesn't mean I wasn't speaking out against it. I opposed it, and there's no doubt for anybody who knows me knows that I would have been a member of the Mean 15. I mean, it's interesting who supported it. Joey Gilbert does not talk about the commerce tax. The reason Joey Gilbert doesn't talk about the commerce tax is he supported it. He supported. The reason he doesn't talk about illegal immigration is that he is a immigration lawyer, and he helps illegal immigrants stay in the country. I'm trying to be very, very open here as to why I did not support the commerce tax and why other people in this campaign aren't talking to repeal it. Name one other major candidate in this primary that's talking about repealing the commerce tax. Lombardo's not talking about it. Clearly Joey's not talking about it. He can't because he supports it. But no one else is talking about this commerce tax, and I think it is probably the most burdensome tax on small businesses across this state.
For the benefit of Nevadans who have moved here since that time, tell everyone what you mean by the Mean 15.
All right. So back in, I guess it would have been 2015, there were 15 holdouts. So you need 2/3 of a vote to increase a tax here in the state of Nevada, and 2/3 if you had 15 Republicans, which we did at the time, that didn't support increasing a tax, whether they considered it constitutional or not. But clearly, it was a business income tax. They were holdouts, and so they weren't able to get it across the finish line until one of them changed their mind. They were called the Mean 15, and they were castigated, obviously, for being holdouts for this particular tax. One of the ones doing the major lifting on the castigating was Joey Gilbert. If you saw his social media comments on members that were holding out, it was pretty aggressive. Let me just put it that way. But finally, one broke. I think it was Assemblyman in Prump that finally said, "Okay, we'll move this tax forward," and that's how the bill finally got passed. But the Mean 15 were the 15 Republican holdouts on that particular tax.
To totally change gears.
Okay.
There was a lot of tax policy discussions.
Yes.
We wanted to also ask you a few questions about abortion and abortion policy.
Yeah.
So when you announced for governor, I think you were asked, or it came up, that you strongly supported the fetal heartbeat bill in Texas.
In Texas, correct.
You liked what they did. So we wanted to know, other Republican-led states, such as Oklahoma, have passed bills that have banned abortion entirely outside of medically necessary purposes. Is that something you'd want to pursue or support?
Well, I'll just say I want the most aggressive pro-life legislation that I could pass in this legislature. So I think that answers the question. I will be a pro-life governor. I am pro-life, and I'm proud of it.
So you're very pro-life,
Pro-life.
very strong pro-life.
Yes.
What is your plan to work, around or with the voter initiative that was passed in 1990 that puts these protections on abortion in Nevada?
Yeah, I think that I understand that there are certain restrictions. Obviously, I'll sit down with an attorney general. Hopefully, it's a Republican attorney general to find out how far we can go. I'm going to guess a lot of this gets challenged in courts, and frankly, that's probably where it should end up at the end of the day. But the bottom line is that I'll support the most conservative piece of legislation that's pro-life oriented that I can get passed through the legislative session, and we'll let the courts take it from there.
One thing that we've seen reported out in states such as Texas that have passed policies similar to what you're talking about is that, up to thousands of women end up leaving and being abortion tourists, essentially coming to other states to get abortions or abortion services. So what's, one policy or one thing you can do as governor that would, convince these women to continue on with their pregnancies and not move in that direction?
Well, if you take a look at the amount of abortion clinics we have in the state of Nevada versus the family counseling centers, we have 10 abortion clinics for every family counseling center. And I think that needs to be evened out. I want people to know that there are options out there, and there's places that you can go to find and learn about options. I think it's a disgrace that during the pandemic, we had a governor that shut down churches, kept abortion clinics open, shut down schools, but kept abortion clinics open. I think that's wrong. I just think it's flat out wrong that somehow there's science behind that. And I have yet to have anybody explain that science to me. But I do want to make sure that there are family counseling clinics available to those that want to see and find out what the alternatives are.
Would you want state funding to go towards family planning clinics?
Nope, I would not. Nor do I want tax funding going to abortion clinics.
Then how would you be able to support that as governor, or what's
encourage it? You have a soapbox. You get up on there and you set the tone. That's what the governor does: set the tone for the state. And I think if you have conversations, you talk about it, keep it in your State of the Union, I think you can get some enthusiasm behind it.
Moving on to education,
all right,
a huge part of a governor's job. Do you think Nevada's public school teachers are underpaid?
Yes.
You do?
I do, sure.
How, as governor, cutting 20% of the budget, would you be addressing that?
No, and I think it's a fair question, but I do believe that if you just concentrate on cuts. The whole purpose of changing the dynamics of our tax code and cutting the size of government is for an economy to grow. That's what this is all about. This is about economic growth. This is vitality. This is trying to move the, we just sit there every day with this governor and we're on a treadmill. Businesses are just on a treadmill, and they tell me that every single day, and they never get ahead because there's no vitality in the economy that we have. 60% of the small businesses in Nevada are struggling today. I know that you probably won't tell people that. The media won't tell people that. The governor won't tell people that. The left won't tell people that. Hollywood won't tell people that. But these businesses are struggling, and they're on a treadmill every day. The whole purpose of giving them relief, both individually and as businesses, is for this economy to grow. And as this economy takes off, stop and think about it for a minute. Look where South Dakota is right now. During the pandemic, they didn't shut their place down. They didn't close their schools. They didn't close their churches. And today they have the lowest unemployment and they have the highest economic growth in the country. And Nevada has an opportunity with the right governor to go down the same road. So yeah, you can grow the revenues here in the state of Nevada. You just don't have to do it in such a burdensome way that it stymies economic growth. That's what this is all about. It's just about trying to get this economy up and running, get good paying jobs, get good schools, and of course to make safer neighborhoods because of it.
So you think you can grow yourself out of a 20%
Absolutely.
cut?
No, absolutely.
Years?
Absolutely. I want that. I saw it with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act we did in Washington, D.C. There's no reason why a Tax Cut and Jobs Act in the state of Nevada wouldn't work the same way.
Do you agree with, there's been an independent commission on school funding that met probably 2 years ago now and did recommend Nevada looking at the property tax formula as a way to get a more stable funding source for education. Do you agree with that independent commission?
Well, first of all, I haven't read the report, so it'd be hard for me to report on it. And I don't know how many independent commissions there have been out there in the 30 years that I've been watching this process, but probably a dozen. So there's all these studies sitting on the shelf that just gathering dust. So I'd have to take a look at it, but if it includes raising taxes or increasing your property taxes, I wouldn't support it.
Would you be interested in re-looking at the formula and maybe not, making a judgment immediately?
If it was revenue neutral, sure, I'd take a look at it, but it would have to be revenue neutral.
Aside from, I think a lot of folks in the Republican field are saying school choice, is going to solve the problems we have. But what are some other ways that you think you could be improving education in Nevada as governor?
Yeah. Well, first of all and foremost, don't shut the schools down. We have a governor today that half the time he's been governor, he's locked children out of their schools. Just stop and think about that for a minute. He has locked children out of their schools half the time he's been governor. Can you imagine any governor in any time of history doing something like that? And he wonders. And now this governor wonders why second graders can't read, third graders can't write, fourth graders can't do arithmetic. I have a fourth grader granddaughter who received in this county, Washoe County, a notice from the school district. And they said, would you go get flashcards, those multiplication flashcards, and teach your fourth grader the multiplication table, because we're supposed to be teaching division in fourth grade, but they never learned multiplication in third grade. So now they're asking the parents to do something that school class should have done in third grade. That's the first step in making sure that children get the education that they need and the fact that they deserve it. I do believe you've got to break down the school district in Clark County. It's too big. I think you take a very complicated problem, break it down to a much less complicated problem, and that means producing probably 4 or 5 smaller school districts within that district. And by the way, I think the legislature is ripe for that as an idea. I think both Republicans and Democrats are seeing that it is dangerous to drop your child off at a school in Clark County. And I always think of the single mom in an urban setting with 2 children in a failing school district. What kind of hope does she have for that child? And how are we going to fix it for her? And I believe that if that's what you concentrate and think about, we can make life better on that mother and give a better chance for that child to succeed. I will also say that I don't believe that every child has to go to college. I don't think every child has to go to college. If they want to go to college, it should be available to them. But I don't believe that every child needs to. And there's not a reason why every child has to go to a university, a liberal university, end up with $100,000 in debt, come out and work for some restaurant chain. It just doesn't make sense. If we should have skills training in our high schools, teaching them what they used to teach, besides reading, writing, and arithmetic, but you could learn automotive, you could learn perhaps even how to drive a truck, because we know how bad that industry is right now, but woodwork, welding, and all that. Within a couple of years of getting out of school, you could have a 6-figure job in any of those. All I'm saying is you don't have to go to college. There's opportunities out there to make a living, own a home, and get a couple of cars in the driveway, take care of your family.
Yeah, and to go back to your point about the breaking up of the school district, you did say at a forum recently that, the violence issue could be addressed by the school breakup issue. Can you kind of walk us through how you see those two issues being related and one problem solving the other?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Most principals of most high schools are there for about 3 years. If you really take a look at the statistics, because all they're doing is trying to control the school, try to avoid violence. We've had over, I think it was reported, 5,000 violent crimes reported in this school district this year alone in Clark County. Think about that. 5,000 reported violent crimes. And what about all the others that didn't get reported? You could probably add to that number. But I'm just telling you, this is too big. It's too big for administrators to control. It's too big for principals to control. The schools are so big, it's too big for even the teachers to be able to control. I think if you break that down into 4 or 5 different districts, and the policing of the school district would be much easier than it is today.
Let me drill down specifically on a couple of things. So speaking of size, where do you stand on the whole class size issue? In your mind, what is too many students to one teacher? And does your opinion vary depending on whether we're talking about elementary school or middle school or high school? What's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was never a supporter of full-time kindergarten. Never supportive of that. I think that these little children ought to be spending more time at home than in a school setting. But you know, we're not there anymore. Needless to say, when I was in the legislature, I supported class size reduction as an assemblyman. So I think the smaller classroom, obviously, the better and easier it is for the teachers to serve. And if they don't have the buildings and the classrooms to do that, then having more than one teacher in the schoolroom, classroom at one time is a positive. Obviously, it's all based on the resources, the necessary resources that you have in order to achieve that.
So you've been critical here of Governor Sandoval on a couple of points. I'm going to give you a chance to agree with him.
All right.
That read by three law that he got done in that final session, in which the Democrats came back last session and basically completely undid. Where do you stand on that?
Well, clearly,
should we bring read by three back?
Well, I mean, think about where society is with Democrats controlling both the governor and both houses of the legislature. I mean, we are the top of every bad list in America right now. I mean, we're talking unemployment, graduation rates, crime rates, suicide rates. I mean, we need some balance in this legislature over here, and for them to be running roughshod over our election process, over our education process, over crime and everything else. It's time for some real balance and frankly, some common sense in that legislature. But no, I certainly support. But you can't expect a child to learn at 3 if you're shutting the schools down. I mean, think about it. We have another variant of COVID that has more people in China that are on lockdown right now that live in America. Over 400 million people are on lockdown right now in China. My point is this: what happens when this election is over? You know, the only reason we're not on lockdown now is because the governor knows there's an election in front of us. The reason we're not sitting here at this table wearing masks with this governor is because there's an election in front of us. What's going to happen the first day, that first Wednesday after the Tuesday election in November? Are the masks all coming back up? We know that this governor is going to do whatever California tells him to do. So, I mean, The bottom line is, yeah, they should be reading by 3, but you can't read by 3 if you're at home. If you're locking children out of the schools, you're not going to learn to read, you're not going to learn math, and you're not going to learn to write.
All right, well, the schools are open now, presuming they stay open.
Yeah, that's a big presumption with this administration.
Well, if you get elected governor, I presume the schools will stay open.
Schools will stay open.
So if they do, then at some point you would support bringing back read by 3.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you believe the government, state government, has a role to play in helping people afford childcare and expanding access to affordable options there?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems that we have today is the availability of parents having access to childcare. There's no doubt that there's a problem there. And government should do everything they can to incentivize that kind of activity. Are we going to, I mean, how many programs are we going to have out there in order for this to occur? I mean, I want more childcare out there. I want to make sure that we put all the tax relief and whatever is necessary, whatever incentives are necessary to make sure that a mom can drop their child off if they have to in order to get to work. So, no, it's more about incentives. It's not about spending a lot of money. It's about giving incentives for businesses to thrive and for there to be an opportunity for that area of government or that area of taking care of these children to succeed.
So do you see maybe the state only doing tax incentives as opposed to directly putting money into?
Let's put it this way. If you put moms and dads back to work, put them back to work making a good salary, they will be able to afford it. Right now they can't afford it. Think about the jobs we're bringing into Nevada. You know, they're all warehouse jobs. We keep talking about expanding the state of Nevada. Why aren't we bringing in engineering jobs? Why aren't we bringing in manufacturing jobs? We're bringing in some tech jobs, but I'm telling you, it's warehouse jobs that we're bringing. That has to stop. If you bring in minimum wage jobs, you're going to have more of a burden when it comes to healthcare. The whole purpose of this discussion that we're having is a thriving economy, a growing economy, that people are making above minimum wage, they're making good wages so that they can afford childcare. And for government to have to subsidize that is a failure.
Speaking of minimum wage, since you brought it up, so we're phasing, in Nevada now we're phasing towards 12 an hour ultimately.
Yes.
Where do you stand on that?
I support the process we have in place.
Okay. All right, let's switch to elections.
Okay.
In 2003, when you were Secretary of State,
Yeah.
you made the decision at that time for the state to purchase Sequoia touchscreen voting machines that
Correct.
came with a voter verified paper audit at the
That's
end,
correct.
so there's a paper trail. So that was all in effect going into the 2004 election, correct?
Correct. This is all because of 2000.
So given that that same system was in place, as far as I know, in 2020,
It's not. That system isn't in place.
you have said again and again that you do not think the 2020 election was secure.
Correct.
What is your primary reason for believing that?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that. I believe we have a rigged system here in the state of Nevada, and that's all occurred since the last legislative session, when they said, "Okay, we're going to water down voter ID. We're going to go back. We're going to take a felony called ballot harvesting, and we're going to make it good government, and then we're going to do this vote by mail." And I don't know how many people you've talked to, but if you live in an apartment complex, you probably received somewhere between 5 to 10 ballots, because everybody who's lived there in the last 10 years received a ballot at that address.
But isn't there a big difference between receiving a blank ballot in your mailbox, possibly to the wrong address, and actually filling it out and signing it and sending it in as if you voted it? I mean, one doesn't guarantee the other, correct?
Correct, but just the fact that that's available. I mean, think about it. I mean, we are talking about a system that you can't guarantee that whoever filled out that ballot is the person that they say they are. I mean, that's the system that we have in place now. I mean, it's like putting money in cash in an envelope. That's what we're doing. I mean, who does that anymore? And that's basically what we're doing with vote by mail. We have no idea who filled out that ballot and who signed it.
Well, we do have a signature checking system.
Are you
in
familiar with
place.
it?
I am, and I'm curious to hear what you think about it.
Yeah. No, I think it's as rigged as the rest of the system. In other words, let's go back, because I know a little bit about elections. All right, in 2000, you had the Gore versus Bush, and that was a mess. That was a crisis of confidence here in the state of Nevada. And it was my job to make sure Nevadans believed that the elections in the future were safe and secure. No hanging chads and none of the problems and the issues that were involved. So my job was to take a look at the voting system. We had 6 or 7 different voting systems in the state of Nevada. Some were fill in the blank, Scantron, some were chads, others were electronic. I mean, nobody voted the same across the state of Nevada. 17 counties and 17 different ways to vote. So we said, okay, we're going to structure this so everybody in the state of Nevada knows how the vote's going to occur, and you know that if you're in Eureka County, that they're going to vote the same way in Humboldt County versus how Clark County or Washoe. Everybody voted the same. You know, that's all moved back. It's all changed again with the subsequent secretaries of state who didn't care, subsequent clerks that didn't care. We are back to 6 or 7 different voting machines here in the state of Nevada. We have changed the laws. I was the Secretary of State that made ballot harvesting a felony. For someone to walk into your home, show you how to fill out your ballot, help you fill out your ballot, then take your ballot with them. I made that a felony. By the way, I was working with Chris Giuliani at the time. So you had a Republican and a Democrat, both realizing on both sides the amount of trouble and problems that you could have here in the state if you allowed ballot harvesting. So we made it a felony. It was a valid felony for decades. And now we have a legislature controlled by Democrats that call it good government. No, that's what I'm talking about, rigging the system. So anyway, better ask me that question.
So is this like a 2020 election issue only, or were these issues that you've seen before all of these changes were put in place?
No, my job was to make our election safe and secure back in 2004. And I did it several different ways. You know, I put up a website. The state of Nevada, Secretary of State's office had a website. Every day after early voting, I posted the names of everybody who participated in that day's early voting. And I told everybody in Nevada, go take a look at it. Find a name that shouldn't be there or a name that should be that isn't there. And then call my office. I want you to tell me if you see voter fraud. And know that you have an active Secretary of State that's trying to find it. Sure enough, I got phone calls. And I did that for 2 election cycles. And then after that, it wasn't necessary to do it in the future. But because people now were confident that our elections were safe and secure, they're not confident today. There's no confidence. We are in a crisis right now when it comes to our elections in the state of Nevada.
Do you support the efforts happening in some of the rural counties to switch to paper ballots and hand counting?
Well, I think the confidence factor right now is the number one issue. Confidence factor. Doesn't matter what system you have in place, if nobody's confident in it, what's the point? So some of these clerks and some of these registrars, some of these county commissioners are pushing the paper ballot, and if that's what brings confidence to the process, that's why I had the paper trail added to the electronic voting machines, is because people wanted to be able to see their vote, and they wanted to know in a recount that it was actually done by a paper ballot, not by an electronic voting machine. That's why I put that in place. And if confidence is necessary, if a paper ballot is necessary to grow that confidence, then I'll support it.
And I'm hearing you say, based on your criticism of universal mail-in voting, that you think that should be rolled back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to know who's touched that ballot throughout the whole process. In other words, if I support absentee voting, which is mail voting, but you have to request one, then you receive a ballot, then you fill it out and you send it back and they check your signatures. All you're doing now is massively sending out, a couple million ballots, and you have no idea where they're going. And you're telling me there is no, there's no problem or subject to any problems in the process.
All right, last question on elections.
Okay.
You said, I can't remember, I think it was months ago, and I think you've repeated it once since. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. You said that if you had been governor at the time, you would have fired Joe Gloria, who's
Absolutely.
the clerk, the registrar in Clark
Absolutely.
County. Why?
Okay, so we have the voter verification equipment. So you send all the stuff out by mail, and then obviously by hand checking it, they assumed that it would take too much time, so they purchased these signature verification machines. First of all, they were never certified by the state of Nevada, so they never should have been used. Second of all,
You're saying the signature checking machines
Correct, was not
only in Clark County were not certified?
I will tell you, in Clark County, they were not. They may not have the same machines, or for example, in some counties, they may not even need it. Signature
And is it
verification
the
machines.
Secretary of State's office that does that certification?
Does the certification, correct. So you have to certify that particular piece of machinery. Then there's a knob on this, and this is the crazy part of it, is that you can determine what percentage of the signatures you want to accept. Think about that for a minute. You're not accepting valid signatures. All you're accepting is a percentage of the ballots that come through. And I think that's wrong. When Joe Gloria said, I'm going to accept, said this publicly, 98% of the mail-in ballots, that's when I was done with him. That's when I knew he was a Democratic operative. That's when I knew that this process was rigged.
Have you spoken to him since the election?
I have not.
You didn't
But
call
we
him up
will.
to ask
We
him
will have
what he was thinking while he was doing all these things you have a problem with?
when this moves forward. But having said that, why say that? Why say I'm going to accept 90? Why don't you just accept the valid signatures? Just accept valid signatures. Don't make it a percentage, and that's why I made that comment.
All right, let's move on.
So I wanted to ask about energy environment issues. I think we can start first with Colorado River, which has been on a lot of people's minds, with the water level in Lake Mead going below the water intake pipe.
Yeah.
So
I saw that.
what's Nevada's role or response? What would you do as governor to address the lake's lowering level? How would you negotiate with those other Colorado rivers?
Well, first of all, I have negotiated with Colorado River Compact when I was in the United States Senate, and we tried to allocate more water to the state of Nevada. There's a lot of history to this, and when this water was allocated, 100 years ago, I don't believe Nevada was very well represented at the time. And there's a lot of rumors about why and so on and so forth, but I won't get into that. Simply said, we were not very well represented when the initial allocation occurred. So I have done things when I was in the United States Senate trying to renegotiate, talk to these other states, and try to get us to a point where more water comes into the state of Nevada as opposed to what goes into Arizona. And by the way, we're banking water. I believe we're in good shape here in southern Nevada. We are actually selling some of our Colorado River stake to Arizona and California, that when we need it in the future, we are going to have it. That doesn't mean we're not going to have a problem 10 years from now or 20 years from now, but right now we are banking water in the Colorado River. That doesn't mean we shouldn't renegotiate and try to get more water from that particular river, but that's going to be very, very difficult at its current levels. I own water rights. I know there was one candidate said he knew the most about water. I'm the only candidate in this race that owns both surface water rights and well water rights, agricultural water rights. And I know I've got a ranch that I'm telling you right now that through conservation, and conservation does work, that I'm able to grow twice as much product at half the water use. And if we can get every farmer and rancher to do the same thing, the one thing I will not accept and will not do, and by the way, that's just good governance, I would not move water from any other portion of the state over to another. In other words, as you're well aware of, at the pipeline from Ely and Lincoln County, White Pine and Lincoln County, I would not support transferring water from one basin to another, because long term I think that is very, very poor water policy.
So I'm hearing you support conservation and efficiency as opposed to relocation.
Yes, and Clark County's doing a good job when it comes to conservation. And it's getting tougher, and they're doing what they have to do. But I still believe, because of the efforts of the Southern Nevada Water District, I believe we are good for at least another 20 years.
All right, well, Michelle's about to ask you some economic development questions, and I'm going to kick it off if she doesn't mind, by keeping it the topic on water.
Yeah.
I have been getting an astronomical number of emails from readers who are irate because on the one hand, they're reading stories about we're using the third straw at Lake Mead, and on the other hand, they're reading stories about real estate developments and major land deals and
Right.
the Clark County Land Act and building all the way down to the California border and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how you view this tension between available water and growth, because you've talked a lot about growth and how
Right.
you see Nevada's future is rooted in growth, but how do we do that at the same time that we're trying to be a conservative state when it comes to water and resources?
Well, it goes back to some of the issues I'm talking about. Just being a warehouse state, I want to quit bringing those jobs over here that pay minimum wage. But those warehouse that we're bringing into Clark County use a lot of water. And the way that they cool those buildings off is a tremendous amount of water and usage. And I know that they're trying to restrict that also. Economic growth and vitality, I think, is critically important. I'm well aware of how difficult it is to grow Washoe County, Clark County, and some of these other counties because of the federal government's footprints and the fact that they won't let you expand. Yeah, there will always be arguments between development, water usage. I mean, I don't care if you're in Clark County, go to Douglas County. They're having the same arguments, and there's a county that has a tremendous aquifer underneath of it, and they want no growth. So you're always going to have that argument. The bottom line is what kind of growth are you going to have? I think that's the key, is how are you going to plan the growth? I was before I came into this event, outdoors in the wind here in Reno. Reno's going to be the first hopeful city in the country where they're downtown redevelopment, revitalization, and if you look at what these cities are doing, and Washoe's a perfect example of it, is they're not expanding out, they're expanding up now. They can't get enough land to grow and build enough homes, and so their only alternative is now to start building up. And that's what we're seeing more and more in Clark County. That's what we're seeing more and more. I don't necessarily say it's good or bad, but it's simply the fact is the federal government owns 87% of the state, and they limit the footprint of these cities. And so the only option, if you can't expand out, is to expand up.
Before we move on from the environment, do you believe that humans cause climate change?
I'm not a climate change denier.
What do you think the state's role is in that? I mean, do you support the climate strategy and the carbon emissions goals, the goals to reduce that, the goals to do things about transportation sector to bring emissions down?
I believe the economy will get us there. I'm an all of the above. I'm an all of the above energy supporter. And that does include oil and gas. And I do believe that there will be a time that electricity will become more viable than it is today. It takes a lot of coal to produce the electricity that runs these electric cars. Let's be clear. But that's not to say that you can't have electric trucks, electric vehicles. I mean, if you take a look at some of the mining trucks we have out in Eureka and Elko, and they're the size of a house, they're electric trucks. I mean, that's the amount of torque you can get out of an electric motor. It's pretty incredible. So there's no limitations to what electricity can do. And I think we're producing enough solar energy here in the state of Nevada that we're actually selling it to California, enough to light up over 1 million homes in California. That's what we're doing today. We have intense solar rays between Tonopah and Las Vegas. Obviously, it goes down into Arizona, seeps into Death Valley, but the most intense solar rays in the country is between Tonopah and Las Vegas, and that's why you're seeing so many solar parks set up in those particular areas, and I support it. I support it, and I think the opportunity for the state of Nevada, I think will create jobs. But I do not want to do it. I do not want to do it at the expense of economic growth, because it's not mature enough to handle what we currently have.
So do you think carbon emissions targets that we have in place are appropriate?
Yeah, so if they're reasonable. If they're reasonable. I don't want it to be a drop dead number to the point that it shuts down the economy. If that was going to be the case, obviously I would push back heavily against it. But having targets and say, okay, this is where we want to be, that's fine. That's fine. I can accept those kind of targets, and I think we have an obligation as a government entity to give those kind of incentives and to try to meet those kind of goals.
So part of one of many boosts that the Southern Nevada economy has seen in recent years is that Raiders Stadium deal.
Uh-huh.
So first of all, remind everyone where you stood on that.
On the Raiders Stadium?
Did you approve of what the legislature did?
I am not a sports welfare guy. I'm not a sports welfare guy. I do not believe that taxpayer dollars should be spent on stadiums. Do not believe that.
So the Oakland A's are sniffing around
I'm
for
not.
government money, and
listen to what the governor's saying. Governor's saying he's not going to use taxpayer dollars to build that stadium. I am not a corporate welfare guy. I'm not a sports welfare governor.
All right, let's move on to housing. Pretty big problem in Nevada right now, as we all know. Housing prices are going up, rent prices are going up, wages are not keeping up, so people are struggling. If the legislature were to send you a bill enacting some kind of rent control policy, would you support it? Would you veto it?
Nope, I would not.
So what's the answer?
Well, first of all, rent control is not the answer. I know that Lombardo came out for rent control, so that may be one of the many differences that we have. But no, that's not a free market solution to the problems we have. And I'm not saying that there's any easy solutions, but the wrong solution is rent control.
Does the government...
Affordable housing is almost extinct in this state, and that's a problem. I have young adults that come to me and say, what am I going to do? How am I going to get into the housing industry? And I'm watching downtown Washington, I'm watching what they're doing in Clark, and now they're building up, and their apartments are not necessarily condominiums. Some are, some aren't, but it's a very, very difficult strategy. And every time they build them, the first thing I ask, is this affordable housing? And they'll tell you, no, it's not. They can't afford to build affordable housing. Think about that for a minute. That's the problems we're having.
So what's the one thing, either on a state level or a local level perhaps, that you would support to try to at least mitigate this issue a little bit?
Well, clearly we need supply. That's what we need. We need supply. By the way, and it is affecting our economic development also. If there's no housing in Clark or in Washoe County, you're going to have a difficult time expanding your economic base if there's nowhere for their workers to live. So it's critical in a lot of different areas. And as I mentioned, for young adults trying to get into their first-time homes, you can't do that now. Can't do that. And that does have to change. The issue we have is a supply problem in this state. And biggest problem is the federal government. You have to get permission from the federal government to expand the footprint that you have in these cities across the state. And so I probably did a dozen lands bills when I was in Washington, D.C. to expand that footprint so that you could build more homes, but they only come about maybe once every 10 years. A lands bill is very complicated. They wait till every state has their lands bill in this one bill. And so if Clark came to me and said, hey, we have a developer and he wants to build a tract of 2,500 homes, but we need this piece of land and he's going to swap it for this piece of land that he owns, you have to get federal legislation to approve that. And I would submit the legislation. I would give it a hearing in the resource committee, and then it would sit there for 5 years waiting for all the other lands bills to come in so that there was one major, and when it was done, it was great, but it was already 10 years behind. It was already 10 years behind. So something has to change. Obviously, I'll work closely with our federal delegation to figure out how to expedite that process. But the problem we have is supply. And I'm glad to see some of these complexes that are going up with redevelopment downtowns that are offering housing, but they're apartments and some of them are condos. And I want young adults to be able to buy a home, and right now it's simply not affordable.
All right, we're running a little short on time, not too many more minutes left, so let's switch to criminal justice.
Yeah, there's a lot made in this governor's race of crime,
Yeah.
Especially as, one of the front runners is a sheriff.
Right.
What can a governor actually do at that level to reduce crime?
Well, first of all, one, don't shut the state down. All right, that's probably the biggest issue that we've had in the last 4 years when it comes to crime is the fact that we closed the state down. And
Talk about that a little bit more. Make that connection for the voters. Why did that increase crime?
well, if you take a look at you couldn't go downtown, you couldn't go to the mall on the Strip during the shutdown. During COVID, you couldn't go down there. You had to have a security guard walk with you. Let's say you wanted to return a pair of shoes that you had bought earlier. You had to have a security guard walk with you from your car to the shop and back to your car, or you would have been mugged. It is that simple. That's how dangerous it got on the Strip during the shutdown. So that's got to stop. Second thing that has to stop is you can't turn Clark County into a sanctuary city. You want to live in a dangerous city, you want to live in a dangerous neighborhood, live in a sanctuary city. It is that simple. And if you have a sheriff that practices catch and relief, and he'll deny all this. I know he denies all this, but the ACLU praised him for turning Clark County into a sanctuary city. Every liberal organization and group in Nevada praised him for turning Clark County into a sanctuary city. That has to stop. And
Do you not believe that he has still been cooperating with ICE, as he said, and turning people over to ICE in a less formal way than 287G?
Well, he did all this to try to appease certain communities. I get it. And told them, hey, I'm your hero now. I'm practicing catch and release, and I'm not sending people to ICE. And if you're here in this county illegally, we're not turning you over. That was to appease the community. Then he got into the governor's race, and his team said, hey, wait a minute, you can't do this. You can't win a Republican primary being pro-sanctuary city. So he made change. It's just like the vaccine mandate. He was the first agency in Nevada to require the vaccine mandate. Why do you think he changed it? He changed it not because of science, he changed it because he was in the governor's race. That is what we have as a candidate running for governor. So if you're asking me what I'm going to do, I'm not going to shut this state down. I'm not going to allow Nevada to become a sanctuary city. We're not going to practice catch and release, and we're going to support the blue. That's what we're going to do, and that will make Nevada a safer place.
So you and hundreds of other Republicans across the country for years now have been drawing a straight line between immigrants and crime waves.
That's not necessarily true. Not necessarily true. It's drugs. It isn't the immigrants themselves. It's the amount of drugs that come in from our southern border. This is all coming from China. So you start bringing these drugs.
What's coming from China? Sorry.
The drugs. The drugs are coming. The fentanyl is coming from China. It's coming through the southern border. And if you're allowing people to pack these drugs in and coming in, these are causing deaths. Every fentanyl death in Nevada is a government mistake, a government error, a government doing its job poorly. Every one of these fentanyl deaths. So I believe it has to do with sanctuary cities, because if they come across the border and they're busing these immigrants to different communities, they're obviously going to go to sanctuary cities. This is where they're going to bust them. They bring their drugs with them, and it crosses the state, covers the state, and every fentanyl death is a responsibility of the government for making bad decisions.
And are you tying violence into that equation as well? So I'm just trying to sort of separate, different types of crimes, and then this overall feeling that you have about the situation in Nevada and what it actually is. So what I'm
go talk to the sheriff in Winnemucca. Go talk to the sheriff in Winnemucca, and he will tell you that he has a drug problem and a gang problem. Go talk to the sheriff in Elko. They now have drug problems, gang problems, and graffiti problems. They never had graffiti problems, but now they have those problems. And I believe, and they believe, that it's coming up from Clark County. If you are a sanctuary city and you bring that caliber into your community, they don't stay there. They migrate and they come into other communities, and they bring with them the drug trafficking that comes with it, the sex trafficking that comes with it, the human trafficking that comes with it. And so this is a problem, and I do lay it at the feet of Joe Lombardo. I do lay these problems at the very feet of Sheriff Lombardo. He was the one that started this process in Clark County, making that's where the responsibility lies.
That will have to be the last word.
That was a good one.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Viewers, thanks so much for joining us once again for one of our On the Record interviews. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Senator Heller, for joining us. Thank you, Michelle and Riley, for your excellent questions. Stay tuned. We'll have more of these interviews in the near future.
Thank you.